Today, we're going to be talking about dumbbell-shaped UFO cases, or at least a couple of them. Dumbbell-shaped UFOs, as you can see here, are typically objects with two spheres connected by some sort of interlinking structure between them. And you can see a few examples of such cases on this screenshot here. We've got the L.C. Elkinson case on the right with the wonderful CGI illustration with the red and green lights on it. We have a pilot encounter, and even in the background, we can see a couple of dumbbell-shaped objects dropping off angel hair in an earlier case, I believe from the 1950s. However, today we won't be talking about any of these dumbbell cases. Dumbbell cases are also sometimes referred to as barbell. Sometimes people refer to them as dog bone shaped UFOs. I've even heard them referred to as balance and scale shaped UFOs. Apparently, the two kind of spheres are the bar in between it is the balance bar on a scale. So they go by various different names. Today, we're going to be talking about a specific dumbbell case that happened in a small rural village in the Moselle district of France. Now, this case, Moselle is a very rural district. As you can see from a photo here, it's mostly a farming area. And this incident kind of happened on this route between the towns of Hestroff and Hoblin. And on this map, you can kind of see here these marks B2, B3, B4, B1. Now, Hoblin is about 9 miles from the German border. And during World War II, this area was host to some bunkers and kind of machine gun turrets that you could still kind of find rusting in the landscape where this pretty much exactly where this encounter happened. Now, our encounter happened on October 24th, 1976 at around 10:30 p.m. Mr. Lucarelli, who had been hanging out, I guess, with some buddies of his and was driving them back home in another town nearby. And after he dropped them off, he's driving home and he's got his young daughter with him. And they're driving down a small road that connects the villages of Hestroff and Hoblin, where they observed two lights on a hill, which initially appeared to be from a stationary vehicle. Upon getting closer, he soon realized they were coming from a strange craft hovering about 100 meters above the ground. It had a distinct shape. The object, approximately 50 meters long, was shaped like two interconnecting spheres with a rectangular structure and had numerous colored lights. Now, if you recall, he had just been on this road 20 minutes earlier, and he did not see these objects at all when he was driving on this road just 20 to 30 minutes prior when he was returning his friend's home. And so this object was not there then, and it is now. The object began to follow the witness's car, parallel to the road, on the driver's left. Mr. Lucarelli grabs his daughter, who at that time had been sleeping behind him, and tells her to hold on tight as he'll be speeding up the car. He notices in the center of the object a large window, lit from the inside by a very attenuated whitish or orange light. Inside, he can see two figures, one of which appears to be sitting in an armchair and looking in the direction of the movement of the device. His daughter stated that this gentleman was holding a sort of a stick with a blue ball at the end of it, and the other occupant was heading towards what seemed to be the windowsill. Here, too, the little girl noticed a detail that her father, likely preoccupied with driving, was unable to see. That was that the gentleman had a long beard and hair roughly the same color as their father's hair, that is to say, dark brown. The craft's behavior became increasingly alarming as it began to intercept the path. The object at this point was only about 40 to 50 meters in front of the witness and about 8 to 10 meters from the ground, above a small hut at the side of the road. Mr. Lucarelli, frightened, flashed his headlights. The object immediately gained height and proceeded to follow the vehicle to a nearby village. Now, it's kind of hard to see in this picture, but on the side of the road here, there is a kind of a hill. As Mr. Lucarelli approaches the entrance of the village, he quickly turns on the road on the right that leads to his home, some 200 meters past the crossroads. The object, seemingly surprised by his maneuver, continues straight ahead for about 150 meters before returning to the car as it reaches the house. And this is the road that he turns right to go to his house as the object is kind of following him. The object stops above Mr. Lucarelli's garage. Mr. Lucarelli's wife steps outside to open the door. He points out the object to her. Miss Lucarelli retrieves some binoculars, but as Mr. Lucarelli tries to observe the strange device more closely, the view of the binoculars suddenly goes dark as it turns off its lights, and the object, which has been silent until now, emits a distinctive, dull sound. Now, there's some conflicting information as to how long they viewed the object before they grabbed the binoculars. In one case, he mentioned that him and his wife viewed the object for about 2 to 3 minutes before they went inside to go get the binoculars. Now, Mr. Lucarelli states that he has never heard this dull sound before, but he is confident that he could recognize it if he heard it again. At this point, a large unlit white headlight beneath the window suddenly lights up, and the object moves slowly away in the direction of the village of Trombone. The following day, Mr. Lucarelli finds unusual ground markings in the field where the object had been. These 3 ground markings, resembling 2 large double circles or figure eights, remained visible for months after the event. An investigation by the local gendarmerie found that no electrical anomalies or power outages occurred in the town at the time of the incident, and they suggested that the ground marks could have been caused by a tractor that went through the area the day before. However, local UFO investigator Michael Turco noted that the marks did not match typical tractor marks and remained visible long after the incident, which you would not expect in the case of tractor marks. In fact, the tracks were visible for 5 months after a freeze and snow had occurred. They could still apparently kind of see these kind of marks. And as you can see here, these marks we had 2 interconnecting circles, each in a figure 8. They're about 15 meters from one end of the figure 8 to the other end of the figure 8. Each of these circles was about 1 meter between the inner circle and the outer circle. And each of these circular paths, both the inner circle and outer circles, had a width of about 3 to 4 centimeters. So you might imagine, I guess, if a tractor had a wheelbase of about 1 meter and had tires that were 3 to 4 centimeters wide, they probably could, in fact, make these marks. And these pictures only show 2 marks, 2 of these figure eights, but apparently there is 3 of these figure eights, and they are roughly 5 to 6 meters apart from each other on the ground. The case received media attention and was briefly mentioned in the local press. And here we have the article that was published in the Republican Lorraine on October 27, 1976. The gendarmerie, while acknowledging the sighting, was cautious about the testimony's reliability. I guess the local gendarmerie officer knew Mr. Lucarelli, and he considered him an intelligent and stable individual, but wasn't willing to go any further as to what happened in this case. Just that he was a reliable guy, and that's kind of all they had to say about it. An additional observation that was shared in this local press coverage was made nearby in Quimmery-les-Deux on the 25th around 8 p.m. Miss Marcelle Biver, a poultry farmer, was watching television when she suddenly hears a sharp noise against the shutters. She looks and witnesses a dark yellow ball the size of a flashlight. About 5 minutes later, she heard the same noise again against the shutters, and the same phenomenon, but louder this time. Her 2 sons, Bernard and Didier, were also witnesses to the strange phenomenon, which occurred less than 24 hours after the observation made by Mr. Lucarelli. And as you can see in the map here, Hobbling and Quimmery-les-Deux are basically really close to each other. In fact, if you look up addresses for Hobbling, they list the city as Quimmery-les-Deux. So I guess that's kind of like the more major city. And so those 2 signs are quite similar. And on this diagram, you can also see the direction that the object flew off towards Trombone. And as I mentioned at the beginning, all this is very close to the German border. It's about 9 miles away from the German border. That's our case from Moselle, France. Our next case brings us to America, Hayward, California. In fact, Hayward not only is where I grew up as a child, in the 70s, it's where famous ufologist Stanton Friedman also lived at the time. And this case does not involve Stanton Friedman, but it does in fact involve another UFO researcher, Michael M. Jaffray. This case happened on February 28, 1971. Michael M. Jaffray, a motorcyclist and UFO researcher. Jaffray was founder of DataNet, which was a UFO amateur radio network, which was basically a loose network of ham radio operators interested in the UFO topic that would share sightings and other news reports and information amongst each other. So Mr. Jaffray was hanging out at his house this morning, and he had been working on a couple of projects and kind of wanted to take a break. His son and daughter were kind of busy doing their own thing. And so he decides to go on a motorcycle ride. He kind of packs up his gear. He brings some binoculars. He doesn't. He has a camera, but he doesn't have any film, so he decides to leave that at home. And it's about 11 a.m. when he decides to embark on this ride from his home at Mountain View, California, towards Bodega Bay. He decides he's going to go visit the location of the Alfred Hitchcock movie, The Birds. And the weather is calm, there's strong winds, and traffic is heavy on Highway 17. While riding near Hayward, California, Jaffe was watching the private air traffic in the area. Suddenly, on his left, he notices a small twin-engine plane, probably a 68-passenger model, diving sharply. About 100 feet in front of this plane, he observes an unusual object in the sky. It consists of two brilliant spheres, about 12 inches wide, connected by a hazy white linkage with a trailing link. The leading sphere appears red, while the following one is blue or possibly green. Now, this dumbbell-shaped object is slightly different than some of our others in the sense that it apparently has this kind of linking trail past that second sphere. Usually people just kind of report the two spheres and the interconnecting object, but this one apparently has a trail. And the reason why he's unsure if the object is blue or if it's green is because his motorcycle helmet is tinted yellow. And so a green light could appear blue through the tint of the yellow. Now, this object maintains a constant distance in front of the small twin-engine aircraft, diving and maneuvering in sync with it, always maintaining this roughly 100-meter distance between the two. Jaffe watches the object for about 4 seconds before it moves behind him, making further observation difficult. At this point, he's driving down the freeway, and he's in heavy traffic, and he's in the center lane. And he's unable to make an immediate move over to the side of the road to get kind of a better view. When he is eventually able to stop, he is only able to see the tail of the plane in the distance. The aircraft appears to be in level flight at about 300 meters altitude. Unfortunately, he was unable to get the plane's tail number. The strange object at this point could no longer be seen, so he did not bother to take out the binoculars that he was carrying with him. As you can see, he got further away. That kind of red blackish dot with an arrow is the observer. That's the guy on the motorcycle. And these are the kind of distances. And so by the time he was able to pull over, he's quite a ways away, and you can no longer see that object. He quickly makes some sketches of the object and wrote down as much detail as he possibly could before he gets back on his bike and continues on his way. When he reaches San Rafael, he stops at a local pancake house for some coffee, and again writes down all the details that he could remember of the sighting. He compares them with his previous notes, and everything tallies. They were the same notes. He didn't remember any new details, and everything seemed to be accurate. Now, Mr. Jaffrey apparently had some experiments with lasers and other kind of light and optical-like experiments. So when he gets home, later he decides to conduct some experiments to recreate the brilliance of the object using mirrors, lasers, and lights, but he's unable to replicate it exactly. He can rule out common explanations, such as kites and balloons, his argument being that the objects, because they were able to maintain that same distance in front of the plane throughout the sighting, implied that they were at a velocity above wind speed. And he also ruled out reflections, concluding ultimately that what he saw was truly anomalous. Now, as I mentioned, Jaffrey was a UFO researcher in the 70s. In addition to DataNet, in addition to their amateur radio network that they operated, they also put out a publication called DataNet. And this is kind of a document from the first, I believe, issue of DataNet and kind of talking about their start there. So you might expect that his story would have been published in, kind of the publication of his own journal. Well, it was, but it was only basically covered very briefly. This is all they covered it in his very own journal. We don't really get a more detailed investigation or explanation or coverage of the case as we might have expected. He basically shares the bare details of the case. And he mentions how he rolled out the possibility of light reflections, and noting that because, again, the winds were gusting at speeds as high as 65 kilometers an hour, that would preclude the notion that these objects were in fact a kite or a balloon. Now, I will mention, he did point out that there were a lot of kites in the sky. I mean, quite a lot of kites, 50 to 100 kites he saw in the sky at the time in the area. But he argued that he looked at the kites and none of them gave the appearance of the object that he saw when he was driving down the freeway. And so he did not believe it was, in fact, a kite. Now, I actually, in the same article, he published this kind of a sketch, which I'd previously shown. And that's all the coverage that they did in DataNet's very own publication. Now, I learned about the article through Flying Saucer Reviews, Case History, Supplement number 5. which Mr. Jaffrey published an article titled Personal Observations While Motorcycling in California, where he shared this sighting with us. Now, I was unable to find any information about where Jaffrey is now or what he's been up to in the decades past this event. No luck locating him after his DataNet days. So those are two cases. What in fact might these dumbbells be? Well, in my opinion, in many cases, a lot of these dumbbell sightings are just going to be normal planes that people see the lights, for example, these red and green lights on the wingtips. And the interleaking structure is because at night or whatever, they can't see the plane in full detail and they just kind of see an object between them. I think in many cases, that's what we're dealing with when we're talking about these dumbbell sightings. Now, applying that to these cases, it doesn't really work out. For example, Mr. Lucarelli's case. Mr. Lucarelli's case did in fact happen at night. So yeah, maybe it could be a plane. But the case happened so close and was supposedly such a close-up encounter, it's hard to see how we could misidentify a plane. And why would a plane be flying apparently so close to the ground and so close to him throughout this whole event? Now you do have to consider witnesses are not perfect with their estimates of distance. And so it is possible the objects were much further away than Mr. Lucarelli actually believed. But in his case, we also have the testimony of his daughter, who is young, and supposedly his wife also saw the sighting when they finally got to the house. So what did he see? I'm not sure. I don't know what he saw, but it probably wasn't a plane. Another example of what these things could be are balloons. And in fact, there are tandem balloons that get released. And as you can see on this picture on the right, there's even balloons with kind of an interconnecting structure. Now, in Mr. Jaffe's case, the case happened during the day, so it's doubtful that it was a plane with lights on it. In fact, we know that he saw other planes in the area at the time. So in his case, we're probably not talking about a plane. Could it have been balloons? Maybe. Could it have been some sort of kind of a kite or a balloon kite kind of hybrid kind of deal like that? You know, possibly. As you mentioned, there were, I think up to 100 kites in the sky at that day. It's entirely possible that maybe that distance that he believed was stable between his entire encounter wasn't exactly as stable as he thought it to be. That could have been a perspective illusion on his part. Or maybe, in fact, he did see some dumbbell-shaped object in front of a plane. Who knows? But that kind of wraps up the two cases I have for you today. I'll be working on a part 2, where I will share with you the Elsie Oakenson case and a couple of other dumbbell cases, because there are quite a lot of them. It is a fairly common kind of standard kind of UFO shape. Not as popular as your more common saucers or cigars, but enough that it gets included on those various like diagrams of UFO shapes that you see. Thank you.